Hey, what's going on everyone? My name's Chris Winter and today I'm going to do an in-depth comparison between the brand new Sony A6300 and a big competitor, which is the Canon 80D. Now make sure to subscribe as I'm going to be giving away either one of these two cameras, a Canon 80D or a Sony A6300, to a subscriber. And if you haven't done it yet, definitely make sure to check out my top 10 list of the best cameras for under $1,200. Both the Sony A6300 and the Canon 80D are on the list, but they don't come in at number one, so check it out to see what does. I'll put a link in the description box below. But anyway, let's check out these two cameras. So I want to start off this comparison by talking about the build quality and the features of these two cameras. Now the first thing that you're going to notice when you pick up these two cameras is the difference in size and weight. The Canon 80D feels really like a dedicated DSLR, and on the other hand, the Sony A6300 feels a little bit like a mix between a compact camera like an RX100 and a DSLR. I've been using DSLRs for a while now and really like the way that they feel in the hand, and the Canon 80D is the same for me. Now it's not as light as some of the other Rebel cameras, but it's also not as heavy and cumberston like the bigger full frame bodies. But I have found myself leaving this camera at home sometimes because it is a little bit too big, and that's something that I've never really found myself doing with the A6300. By the way, let me know in the comment section below which one of these two cameras you choose and why. So the menu systems on both of these cameras are actually pretty simple and quite clear, and I think the one that you're going to prefer is going to be the one that you're used to. One thing I really do like though is the ability to change the menu settings with my finger using the touchscreen on the Canon 80D, which is something that's really missing on the A6300. But overall, both of the menu systems are pretty good. But one thing to note is if you do like to customize your buttons and things like that, definitely look towards the Sony A6300 because I found it was a little bit more customizable than the 80D. Like I said in my full review, having the ability to have a touchscreen is something that I never really thought I'd actually need on a DSLR, but something I really enjoy. It's great for swiping through menus quickly, but also setting your autofocus points as well. And to me, I actually was a little bit disappointed with the screen on the Sony. You know, it's actually a really nice screen, but the fact that it can only flip around to about here and also isn't a touchscreen is a real bummer. And one last thing is that both of these LCD screens really do attract fingerprints like crazy, so you've got to be a little bit careful with that. But overall, in terms of the actual LCD screens, the Canon is the winner by a long way. Now, over the last few months, Canon and Sony have been touting their autofocus systems to be some of the best in the world. And after my testing, I can agree with this. Okay, so in terms of autofocus in stills, the Sony's been a clear winner for me. It's ridiculously quick and it's incredibly good at tracking subjects. The Canon's performed well also, but it really doesn't compare with those 400 plus autofocus points on the Sony A6300. Now another thing is if you do like to shoot using the LCD screen, and I know a lot of people do, the Sony's the winner for that as well. I found it was just as fast using the LCD to focus as it was using the electronic viewfinder. The Canon 80D was pretty good, but not as good in performing the same tests. So in terms of stills autofocus performance, the Sony is a big winner here. Now the Sony was a winner in terms of stills autofocus performance, but for video autofocus, it's a little bit different. Now I've been a big fan of the dual pixel autofocus on the old 70D for a while now, and the new 80D is even better. For most conditions, I'd say it's almost at a perfect level, and that's pretty big to say because just a couple of years ago, autofocus in DSLRs was pretty bad. Compared to the Sony, it's a lot smoother transition when focusing, whereas the Sony's a much quicker focus. Kind of like it's had 10 cups of coffee in the morning or something like that. But let's now talk about resolution, and this is where the A6300 really jumps ahead. It shoots in 4K, whereas the 80D only shoots in 1080p, and the difference in sharpness is night and day. So if you know you want to shoot 4K footage, I'd absolutely be going for the Sony A6300, but if you're still happy shooting 1080p, which I am, you could go for the Canon 80D. Now I just quickly want to talk about the slow motion capabilities of both of these cameras. So if you like to do a lot of slow motion footage, you'll probably want to look towards the Sony A6300 as it can shoot 120 frames per second, whereas the Canon tops out at 60 frames per second. Now once you get it back into your editing station, you can actually notice quite a big difference from 120 frames per second to 60 frames per second. And if you do a lot of slow motion footage, it's definitely something to consider. Now, if you want to see the difference between the 120 frames per second and the 60 frames per second of both of these cameras, I've made a little video right here and you can click it somewhere around there and check it out for yourself. Now, one area where I really found the Canon won big time was actually in battery life, and this can be a pretty big deal for some people. So the batteries on the Canon 80D totally outperformed the Sony A6300's batteries. So if you're going to be shooting a wedding or a long event, it's definitely something to take into consideration. So the Canon has better battery life, but one thing to note is that the Sony A6300 can actually be charged using an external power bank, which is a great feature, especially if you're shooting video. So let's quickly talk about the burst modes of these two cameras, and the Sony's the winner here. It's got 11 frames per second, which sounds a little bit like this. Whereas the Canon has 7 frames per second, and it sounds like this. So you can definitely tell a big difference, and if you're going to be shooting any sport or wildlife, I'd highly recommend the Sony, but you'd probably be doing that anyway because of its awesome autofocus performance. Now both of these cameras come in at around about $1,000, with the Canon coming in $200 more at $1,200. Now that's actually a pretty big difference when you consider the features of the cameras, and it goes to show that Sony's pretty keen on taking over this prosumer market. Now I think both cameras are very well priced, and either one will be a good choice. One thing to remember though is that the Canon does have a much larger selection of native lenses, so that's something to take into consideration definitely. So the big question is, which one should you buy? So I think if you're going to be shooting any sports or wildlife, I'd definitely be looking at the A6300. If you're going to be shooting weddings or events, the bigger body and better battery life of the Canon 80D might be for you. Now for video work, if you absolutely need 4K footage and great slow motion, the choice is obviously the A6300. But if you're happy with 1080p and want a headphone jack, I'd definitely be looking at the Canon 80D. Either way, you're not going to go wrong with either of these two cameras. They're both fantastic performers. Now make sure to subscribe if you want to go into the draw to win either a Canon 80D or a Sony A6300. And also make sure to check out my top 10 list of the best cameras for under $1,200. I'll put a link in the description box below. Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.